Given this similarity, I do wonder how a campaign against one another would go between the Emperor's first son and Gidrim's star.
Within the barren confines of the NEMESOR's flagship, an important meeting of his lesser lords was taking place. ZAHNDREKH had gathered them for their council regarding a pressing matter. How to best present and parade their latest string of triumphs while also exalting their Pharaon and not diminishing his own prestige upon returning to Mandragora. As usual, their lethally still glares were all they contributed to the ramblings of his master, occasionally blessing Oberon himself with one as well, whilst he towered silently by their lord's side. Before any conclusion could be reached, however, the discussion was interrupted by an incoming projection missive. Patched through with all haste due to the familiar seal that heralded it, the room was drowned in shadow in preparation for the radiant form of the Stormlord to emerge from their table's orbiculum. Having been caught outside of an active celebration, ZAHNDREKH was apparently lucid enough of his political position and immediately, but not hastily, lowered himself to one knee, a gesture mimicked by everyone else present, before giving his greeting.
Thank you for gracing us with your presence, my king. We were on our way back to the Crown World, but it is still a pleasure to be in your audience, even in such advance. To what do we owe this great honor?
Your adulation is not required, NEMESOR.
Imhotep choked the life out of the distraction and proceeded with delegating business.
My chief astromancer has divined that a distasteful dynasty has unlawfully obtained an artifact crafted by the great occult encoder. If it were to remain in their hands, they may grow to be bothersome to us. Before any kind of return, you will go and retrieve it, as your aptitudes appear to be most fitting for the task at hand.
Notable disgust seeped along with their Pharaon's tone, and Oberon sympathized. Distasteful was the very apt indicator that the Stormlord used to regard the humans augmented in seeming mockery to their own race, that called themselves the Adeptus Mechanicus. Still, the uncomfortable similarity they shared with the necrons, despite its primitive state, was not to be underestimated, especially if they ever managed to learn the secrets of such a valuable piece of technology. Any thoughts of such important matters, however, were briefly banished from his engrams due to ZAHNDREKH's next words.
Ah, Lady Vishani, the jewel of the Amunos.
His tone became more sly.
And the one that has captured dear Orikan's heart, from what I recall?
A chuckle escaped him.
My deepest apologies for being this forward, my glorious king. But if it is a matter of theft, shouldn't it be simply brought to the court and handled by the lady's own dynasty? Or is it some extreme gesture of courtship on his behalf? I believe I was a romantic savant in my youth, and I would happily give Orikan some pointers in the field that don't necessitate your involvement.
Moments like these reminded the Varguard that he was still, technically, alive, because they made him crave the sweet release of death, a desire that may very well have been granted to them all at that instant. Any consideration to advise his friend, or even clarify to him that the Amunos had been lost for a significant while now, was preceded and banished by the Stormlord's cold interruption.
Cease your foolishness, NEMESOR.
My deepest apologies, Lord. I meant no disrespect.
Silence!
Imhotep's clawed hand raised, as if attempting to grasp his underling, but halted at his recoil from the command.
If these upstarts unlock the artifact's knowledge, I will be even more displeased than I already am. You will marshal your standing forces and immediately move to recover it. The world, which I have indicated to your Varguard, and its surrounding system hold no value to me. So upon collecting the artifact, you may consider everything else as disposable. Be sure to make haste with the campaign.
The Pharaon's gaze finally fell on Oberon.
The Diviner has ordained that if it is delayed, the enemy is bound to become very stubborn.
Then his form disappeared. A curious choice of words. How concerning could the so-called Astartes be that the Stormlord of all people would caution haste before their arrival?
Alright then.
ZAHNDREKH snapped him back to the present as he himself stood up. beckoning the others to do the same.
My lords, regrettably, the planning of our triumph will have to wait until we notch another victory on our belts. For the magnificence of our brilliant king, we shall put these thieving scoundrels in their place.
A pause briefly gripped the room.
You may go make your preparations.
Contemptuously, the other overlords exited. Once alone, ZAHNDREKH's vocal unit let out a sigh.
Well then, old friend, time to impress the chronomancer's beloved.
Despite their current predicament, Oberon figured he might indulge in a small bit of fun he had grown to enjoy in the time after their perilous venture on Doath, playing along with his master's state of mind.
Truly, my lord? Are you trying to win her affection over the diviner?
Oh, you scandalous oaf!
The NEMESOR laughed, striking his Varguard's arm.
Has none of my most excellent noble etiquette rubbed off on you?
Not as much as your humor.
Well, that is better than nothing, I suppose. Regardless, even if this is a special case, we must follow protocol. While we travel to our destination, have the cryptex issue a demand to the thieves to relinquish their stolen booty upon our arrival, or face our might in battle.
Suppressing a cringe of his features, Oberon raised an objection.
I do not believe this is a wise decision, my lord. The Stormlord's instructions were clear. We ought to come upon them as a thunderbolt, claim the artifact, and leave with haste.
Clearly, you still have a lot to learn about the matters of statecraft, old friend. Despite any professed urgency, I will not allow my Farron's good name to be besmirched in such a fashion. The decision is final. Have it relayed and help me pick out our army, for the case we must resort to violence.
This time, it was the Varguard's turn to sigh in defeat.
As you command, my lord.
Upon a near equally opulent vessel, only superiorly illuminated and actually hospitable to life, a gathering of significantly less pomp was taking place. Azrael and his Genesire were perusing star maps, going over reports and sightings of enemy movements. The Supreme Grandmaster marveled at his Primarch's ability to not merely process battle data, but seemingly live and breathe it. With mere delegation, he was putting down fires and plugging openings towards more vulnerable sectors. For the briefest of heartbeats, the entertaining thought that he could best the Lord Regent in his field of leadership caressed his mind, but everyone's attention was demanded by the Bridge Master's Vox. Lord Primarch, the Chief Engineer reports that an important holovid message had been intercepted on Mechanicus frequencies, and he insists for you to see it immediately. Such brazenness towards the Lord of their bloodline incensed Azrael, but before he could issue a reprimand, his father calmly, but firmly, stated,
"Patch it through."
Acknowledging with a nod, the officer did so, summoning the towering form of a tech priest from the bridge's hololith, which immediately played a looping missive.
I am Drusian Omega 8, Archmagos Dominus of Forge World Ganica 7. Our communication arrays were bombarded by an incomprehensible digital barrage of xenos origin. What was initially believed to be a cybernetic attack upon our systems was deciphered to be a threat. Its engrams were foreign to us, but upon consulting with archives of the Ordo Dialogos, we were able to partially translate a fragment of the overall message as such. Return the stolen artifact. Gracious mercy found. Wrath of the storm. Any servants of the Blessed Cog and the Golden Throne are summoned to repel this incoming threat. Priority ultima absolutis.
Leave it to the Mechanicus to dabble in Xeno heresy, and then beg for their lives to be saved,
the Supreme Grandmaster muttered with disgust.
What information do we have available of Ganica 7?
L. Johnson asked one of the bridge console operators.
Don't the Scions of Mars have sufficient forces to deter invasions of their holdings?
According to our archives, my lord, it is a fairly young Forge World, only exploiting its resources and those of its surrounding systems for barely half a millennium. Its known standing army is not as grand as others, and it fields no Legio Titanica contingents. However, it services and supplies the equipment of 24 Astra Militarum regiments across its 3 surrounding subsectors. In that regard, it is noted as a keystone world for overall Imperial operations. Only a minute flicker of his eyes indicated that the Primarch had begun to dissect the provided knowledge. Azrael instinctively did the same, though he elected to hear the lion's words. He did not expect for his Genesire's voice to find him first.
What do you think would be the best course of action in this case, Supreme Grandmaster?
Icy shock flashed through him, but it was nowhere near the same when he had first reunited with their progenitor. The Primarch asking for his input was not something he had gotten used to just yet, but he knew from the look in his father's eyes that this was a trial. One he himself had applied to neophytes of the chapter in the centuries past. Composing himself in milliseconds, the Lord of the Unforgiven spoke his mind as his eyes focused on the star charts once more.
Ideally, a less daunting force should be sent to reinforce the Forge World, as maintaining its function for all of the neighboring war efforts must not be interrupted. However, we have already dispatched most of the Crusade to deal with matters far away.
His hand moved and adjusted the projected map as he reviewed and presented the segments of space pertinent to his words.
That leaves only one viable support group that is within good proximity to Ganica.
He looked up at his Primarch.
Us.
A minor turbulence of the acids in his stomach began to rage, as he did not like the idea of having the powerful core that were the Primarch and some of the chapter's most elite warriors wasted on such a seemingly minor tributary, when the potential for a greater danger that would truly merit their involvement to emerge loomed in the shadows. However, it would subside when the lion nodded and said, as if having read his thoughts.
You are correct, and while I share your concern, it is a risk we must take. Not only for the continued production of the Forge World, but also due to the nature of the words they believe to have translated. If any kind of Xenos force has dared to declare itself this openly, whatever the Mechanicus have uncovered must be truly dangerous. Both to them, by inviting the enemy that now marches against the stronghold, but also equally, if not more so, to that very same enemy should this artifact be studied or used. Steel your hearts, my son, and give the order.
Returning a nod of thanks, Azrael turned to the Master of Vox and issued the command to their fleet.
Strike Force, assemble and embark towards the Ganica system. Brothers, ready yourselves for Xenocide. The Knights of Caliban march to meet the wrath of the storm.
Здравейте, драги зрители! Needless to say, I am very excited to present this video to you, as it has been in the works for quite some time. Having the two arguably greatest tactical minds of humanity and Necron kind face off in war proved to be a really tantalizing spectacle to craft. In my brief original consideration on the question of who would win between them, the answer seemed fairly straightforward to reach. But it lacked that taste of satisfaction, which left me in the not-so-easy position of figuring out how to approach this narrative, without making either side seem like they are getting more favor than the other. How to make a fair presentation of this game of war. And then it hit me. Why not base it on a wargame match? Here I would like to give very special thanks to Wendigo and Alexon for agreeing to help me by playing a 3000 points game of Dark Angels vs Necrons, each led by the Lion and the NEMESOR respectively, using the 10th edition Standard and Legends rules from February of this year when the game was played. As well as give a shout out to Zombie Bro Snacks for hooking us up with some excellent terrain pieces for Tabletop Simulator. Both players consulted and suggested some flavorful alterations to the match structure itself, which were mutually agreed upon, and helped shape the overarching narrative with some out-of-game dice rolls. However, this will not be a battle report video, but a written narrative. Its main meat is built upon the skeleton of their game, using key moments from it, including the main conclusion to the question posed by this video, with the rest being adapted, embellished, and, where necessary, altered by me for the sake of enhancing the story. Speaking of enhancement, I would also like to thank Zceenook, Underbelly, and RadiantGust for their assistance in bringing the characters to life with their lovely voice and artwork. As well as you, dear Zritel, for watching. Very quickly, I would just like to ask for you to like and share the video, and subscribe for future uploads. The 1000 subscriber mark is drawing closer, and when we reach it, as a special, we will be killing Abaddon. Also, if you would like to support the channel a little extra, you can do so via a coffee donation from the link in the description. With that, I feel like I have stood in the spotlight long enough. Strap in and enjoy Lionel Johnson vs NEMESOR ZAHNDREKH. The Imperial Strategium's room was abuzz with activity, its structure occasionally shaking from the artillery lines that moved around the sector it was buried in. Trajectory alarms, movement reports, and a numberless gaggle of other logistical issues were being brought to and absorbed by L. Johnson, while serfs and Mechanicus adepts tended to the damage suffered by his armor. For but a moment, his mind allowed itself to wish Robute was here to take on that burden, so that he could instead spend more time on the front lines, rather than being cooped up in one place. A thought born of his younger self. The lion smiled internally, but he knew that now was the time to be a general more so than a line officer, especially against an enemy that felt so mirror-like in its ability. If he were still the same man as back then, he might have left the descendants of Mars to their fate. However, this was not an option. The Trader Forces' recent upscale of activity and rumor that more of his now demonic kin were returning to the fore necessitated this sector's stability in order to prevent their advance. That was enough to sway him, even more so than the Archmagos' assurances that their research into whatever the Xenos were after was the supposed key to turning many wars. A hope, his opinion of which degraded with each passing day. With a hiss, the door slid open, giving entry to Azrael and two of his honor guard, who walked up to the Primarch, each clanging a fist to their chest in salute, and then reported.
My lord, we have driven the Xenos scum out of the lower Zeta quadrant. The flanking maneuver of the Death and Ravenwings caught them completely by surprise, forcing the machine at their helm to withdraw after suffering significant damage to its numbers, with only a dozen corpses phasing away.
It pleased the Lion that his son's confidence had grown so much since their initial meeting. The news he brought were definitely positive, but the Primarch of the First was also aware that his Supreme Grand Marshal had developed a preference for softening poor news with positive ones over the course of this campaign. A skill he promptly displayed.
However, one of our last armored companies and its supporting Skitari cohort were routed from the Mid-Spire highways. 3 predators were slain at the cost of one of the alien Arachnonites.
At ease, Azrael.
L. Johnson uttered as he overlooked several other screens streaming data to him and exhaled through his nostrils.
Our warriors are performing as exceptionally as possible, but this rate of attrition is not sustainable. And if we were to siphon further reinforcements from the fleet, it could risk tipping the Void War in their favor.
What we have learned for certain of these things by now is that only their leaders harbor any true thought. If we could find and dispose of the head, the snake will be left disoriented and broken enough to be overcome.
In that regard, have squads Abdiel and Zacharias reported back?
Asked one of the Inner Circle companions. The Supreme Grandmaster's brow furrowed with obvious displeasure.
Squad Zacharias have not returned any contact in weeks. Neither did Squad Abdiel, until today.
He placed his helmet on the central hololith and made a brisk input of key commands. Its projection changed from a model of the battlefield to an oddly moving video feed looking up at 2 Xenos figures, the smaller of which bore an ornate headpiece, while the significantly larger wielded a scythe-like weapon. Most obscene, however, were Brother Abdiel and 5 of his infiltrators, frozen in some manner of stasis field. The smaller alien was speaking to them, but its language was unintelligible. Upon concluding its speech, the commander, or maybe even the prime enemy general, the Lion thought, turned and walked away, vanishing in a swarm of light particles. Its presumed subordinate then began executing his trapped sons through the stasis field. The ground-prone angel, whose last moments they were watching, shakily brought up his bolt pistol and fired at the damnable creature. With uncanny speed, it avoided the shot and surged to him, kicking the weapon out of his grasp. Its eyes flashed maliciously for a moment before it lifted its foot and apparently crushed the Marine's head, concluding the projection. Silent fury thickened the room's air. None of the mortals currently present dared to flinch, even though their instincts were screaming at them to run and hide. Finally, Azrael resumed his report.
At present, both squads are presumed lost to us, but with this picked feed, we believe that they were able to locate the head of the snake.
Order the chapter serfs to inscribe their names and honors in the archives.
L. Johnson hated how he was able to speak those words with an even tone, But regardless of how close the desire to express his wrath crept to him, he also knew that it would do nothing good at the moment. While contemplating this, he also operated the console, returning the visage of the smaller alien to view.
As for this thing, the same conclusion crossed my mind. Judging by the interaction, it is doubtful that it will make itself this vulnerable again.
As if by some providence, before any further consideration could take place, Drushian Omega-8 barged into the strategium, seemingly losing breath from haste.
Lord Sion!
He exclaimed.
What is the meaning of this?
The Supreme Grandmaster protested the intrusion, but was promptly ignored as the tech priest continued his ramble.
Omnisire be praised! His light has come to bless us!
Archmagus!
Like a hammer blow to the cranium, the word instantly halted and silenced the augmented human. Those that followed prolonged its effect.
Compose yourself and make your report, briskly.
Drushian did as he was bid, momentarily shaking his head in an attempt to stabilize, then spoke anew.
The artifact, Lord Sion. We have breached its defenses.
This prompted a raise of the lion's brow, which the tech priest obliged with further elucidation.
It has been revealed to be a data repository of some kind. A powerful machine spirit dwells within it, but our decryption interrogators were able to wrench partial control over aspects of this treasure trove, such as greater understanding of the abominable demons' language patterns.
He then went to operate the hololith as well, injecting 2 of his mechadendrites into it. Upon completing whatever he labored under, the speech of the presumed enemy leader was repeated in somewhat broken High Gothic. Do not deal with assassins. Thieves stooping more lower. Negotiation with your master. Direct surrender face to face. Message sent to him. Ordinatus released this message with them to their home.
Even greater,
the tech priest added,
are the teachings of a different manner of barrier field.
Such technology is not foreign to the Imperium, and has proven to be of middling effectiveness against our enemies.
Azrael cut in.
There better be more to your findings in order to merit your obscene entrance.
You are correct, Supreme Grand Master.
The Archmagos finally regarded the Chapter Master and initiated a new series of inputs on the console.
What the knowledge we wrenched free is not of a mere barrier that simply blocks the passage of matter, but actively cuts and kills the flow of energy or information within itself.
The light construct took on the form of a small marching xenos column, which was then ambushed by an overwhelming Mechanicus force. Normally, nothing too impressive. Except in this case, the majority of the automatons were cut off by this supposed barrier, being unable to break in or out of it. The xenos were disposed in quick, rather than precise fashion, and the corpses of those within the barrier did not phase out.
The prototype device we crafted is able to cut the abominations off from whatever central matrix they are linked to, while they can still function independently on a local level within its confines. They are rendered mortal to our weapons. Not only the rank and file, but their commanders seem to become completely ruined from suffering damage to their engrams while under the field's influence, as the ones we could test it on were observed to be degraded to rudimentary function when they returned to the battlefield.
Glee seeped from his mechanized tone, despite its translation through an integrated Vox grill. Looking up to the Primarch, Drushian concluded,
and according to our tests, the effects can persist for up to a few minutes after the subjects are brought outside of the mortality field. Do you see, Lord Sion, the power hidden in knowledge which us faithful followers of the machine god seek to unlock? The artifact and the research on it must be evacuated from the planet at all cost. We must bring it to Mars in order to fully unlock its secrets.
It was impossible for the Astartes or their gene-sire to deny the magnitude of this discovery, or the rest of the tech priests' insistence. With a revitalized expression of realization, JONSON asked,
How large of an area can you make this field encompass?
At present, only the street projection in the picked feed I presented. I am grieved to admit, but our current resources were insufficient for the purpose of expanding the prototype's capabilities. The only source of suitable components that has been discovered so far is the bodies of the abominations.
Xeno-heresy! One of the other Astartes protested, but silenced himself at the lion's raised hand and his subsequent command.
Archmagus, double the efforts of your scientists and prepare what is necessary for evacuation. But have the prototype readied for transportation in the field. The materials you need will be supplied.
Several days passed since disposing of that gaggle of assassins. By now, Oberon thought that the Stormlord had undersold these humans by simply calling them very stubborn. Initially, their tenacity was almost welcome, since ZAHNDREKH appeared quite delighted to match his wits with someone of a similar caliber to himself. To his Vanguard, there was also the benefit that the fierce resistance put up by the so-called Space Marines was reducing the direct power of the NEMESOR's ever-scheming court, which made them easier to manage. What he never expected to happen, however, was for one of the Lordlings to actually die on this pathetic world. A serious shock to the majority of the court, further enhanced by the recent streak of actual casualties the humans had begun inflicting on their forces. Doubly so, given the fact that whatever means they had devised of doing so bore signs of necron design. Strangest, however, had to be the fairly drastic shift of his master's mood from his usual jovialness to frustration. Oberon had never perceived ZAHNDREKH to be a sore loser. Though in fairness, likely due to the degradation of his engrams, he couldn't really remember the last time his sire had ever lost a campaign, so perhaps this was just uncharted territory for them. Just at the mere thought of it, his facsimile of ire bubbled up. It didn't help that it had already been aroused quite thoroughly when he went to one of their ships in order to get a first-hand report from their cryptex's investigations, only to have to help defend a surprise boarding action launched by the Astartes. Regardless, the intruders were dead and he was late for his report. Briskly, but still following decorum, he entered the NEMESOR's personal chamber, only to find ZAHNDREKH pacing back and forth, surrounded by illuminated projections of various battlefields, some happening in the now, while others were recordings of more notable engagements, with a goblet clutched between his fingers. After not receiving any kind of reaction for a short but uncomfortable while, the Vanguard brought a hand over his mouth and had his vocal unit synthesize a cough. That was finally able to win him some attention.
Ah, welcome back, old friend. I'm sorry for not welcoming you in. Would you like some wine?
Were he able to, Oberon would have rolled his eyes. For the sake of urgency, he elected to simply play the matter off.
Thank you, my lord, but I'll have to decline. There is important news for you.
Have you been able to recover the body of Lord Janosek?
The NEMESOR asked with remorse in his intonation.
No.
His Vanguard replied almost curtly, before continuing.
There was a boarding attempt upon our research center, as the enemy fleet has increased aggression. More importantly, the cryptex have discovered that the entrapment field our enemies have begun deploying bears signs of anomalous design. Whatever the artifact you were sent to retrieve may be, it has become clear that somehow they have gained access to its secrets.
He paused, making a waving gesture with one hand, causing several dozen of the illuminating projections to change and depict the largest recent conflicts, where the giant Space Marine was sighted.
There had also been confirmation that the equipment and troops caught by said field are being gathered, likely for the purpose of expanding its influence.
Hostages and corpse defilement?
A loud hiss-like sigh escaped ZAHNDREKH's vocal unit as he threw himself back onto his chamber's seat.
Thieves through and through!
He lifted the empty goblet high, downing its non-existent contents, and then slammed it onto the stone of the table to his side, exclaiming,
Confound it all!
Concern started to replace surprise, prompting the warrior to walk to his liege's side and ask,
You're taking all of this a lot more sharply than normal. Is something the matter, old friend?
How could I not?
The NEMESOR sounded offended.
Consider the following, my good oaf. Finally getting to match skill and wit against a comparably competent opponent. Someone that makes you scratch your brain with excellent war-making. Except they end up being not only some petty thief, but a disgraceful, body-desecrating vandal. The sheer dishonor of some cretin like that being blessed with such skill is revolting. Given this hypothetical made reality, don't you think it's normal for me to be a pinch disgruntled over it?
He attempted to raise the goblet again, but Oberon's hand shot forward and seized it as well, its superior strength preventing ZAHNDREKH from completing the gesture, instead prompting him to meet his bodyguard's eyes, at which point he said,
I think you've had enough to drink.
Nonsense! A good drink helps me think.
The NEMESOR tried to protest, but when he saw that it had no effect on his unflinching better half, he relented and let go of the goblet.
I'm really sorry, my dear friend. This frustration was really getting to me. And I suppose Lord Dynasek's untimely end rattled me enough to stroke it beyond my better judgment.
His glance returned to the big Astartes.
Why, I ought to drag that full-blown slime in stasis chains across the galaxy to trial, lecturing him all the way.
Disturbed by the imagined prospect of having to endure such a lecture, the Varguard set the goblet down and uttered,
I can understand the sentiment. The Supreme General of theirs has proven to be quite the snake.
Wait.
ZAHNDREKH said with slight surprise. Standing up, he approached a projection that paused on the Imperial leader's face, pointed at it, and asked,
You suppose that he is their overall commander?
His mind took a second to process something before his next words.
I had considered the same, but I wasn't too sure. Did you also reach this conclusion by noticing how reverent all the other soldiers and officers act around him?
Yes.
During his decisively longer pause for consideration, Oberon elected to not reveal that he barely saw any difference between the humans and the orcs, and that one just happened to be both green and the biggest one around. The next question directed towards him, however, proved to be more difficult.
He has displayed quite the martial skill so far. Do you think you could subdue him?
After several tense moments, the Varguard replied,
That I am not really certain of.
What about killing him?
ZAHNDREKH asked with some trepidation in his voice.
That would be simpler to achieve than the former.
More tense silence followed. Their moment was thankfully interrupted by an alarm among the projections, which pushed itself to the fore and showed their forces being routed from a plaza. With a couple of hand gestures of his own, the NEMESOR summoned the visage of the main city their battle was taking place on. With a few more, all of the engagements on display, both active and past, were imposed upon it, painting a curious picture.
Their latest pushes seem to be aiming for the spaceport, and you said the fleet has begun to move more aggressively?
Correct. These were the detected deployments of the entrapment field.
The Varguard joined him, transferring the findings he was presented with to the overlay, which was depicted by several domes of light forming over multiple battles, also apparently moving in the direction of the spaceport.
Since we still hold overall superiority in the war, I suppose that settles their intention to try escaping a planet with the artifact.
Clearly.
ZAHNDREKH noted.
But making it so blatant? That is definitely a ploy.
He covered his face with one hand, sinking in thought as he reviewed the terrain. Several tens of thousands of cubits opposite the spaceport lied a decently spacious, and now ravaged, production yard that hadn't seen occupation by either side in over a month. Most leaders would have narrowed down on it, but a different sequence of consideration possessed the NEMESOR, to the point where he actively spoke it out loud.
Oh no. He's proven to be too clever for something this obvious.
Following which he slowly spun around, tracing lines over the projection with his free hand. The whole scene initially confused Oberon, but he knew better than to doubt his master's tactical acumen.
Aha! There you are.
Victoriously, the general's finger impaled the more densely packed quadrant of buildings.
My lord, isn't that location too unsuitable for aircraft to navigate?
Oh my dear considerate Oberon, this is what he would want us to think.
ZAHNDREKH gleefully began.
If you take note, there is an open cargo bay there. Not too grand, but just suitable enough to store and smuggle a handful of hostages and equipment, all free. On top of that, we do not know what more special ships our enemy possesses or has learned to produce from the stolen Amunos artifact. In fact, there may be no aircraft involved, and they will simply use it to leave the city to somewhere entirely unknown to us, only to then depart the planet.
It was sound logic, even if it didn't sound like it. However, the Vanguard was not prepared for the NEMESOR's next orders.
Send word to our other lords to concentrate their effort on blocking the push to the spaceport and to dedicate a partial diversion towards the demolished production yard here. And to all available cryptex to concentrate their ministrations on the cargo bay and focus on providing countermeasures for the entrapment field. We, along with one more of our lords' forces, will lead a cohort directly into the heart of the beast.
Sire, I must counsel you against exposing yourself directly.
His friend almost growled out in annoyance.
This battlefield has proven itself to be as unstable, or even more so, than a Doat. Please, do not take such a risk.
He could see his friend pause his sudden jubilation and ponder once more. Regrettably, the final decision he came to was not what he hoped for.
I recognize your concern, my brother, but I need to meet this general. I can feel it in my soul, Oberon. Surely, once we cut off their escape, we will be able to put a swift and decisive end to this whole ordeal.
He calmed down, leaning slightly towards his Vanguard.
Please, trust in me as I trust in you.
With a deep sigh of his own, Oberon replied,
I do, ZAHNDREKH. I do.
Rumbling in the sky oversaw their hidden withdrawal, as containers filled to bursting with the various xenos machines were craned up to the surface from their underground storage. Though, given the intense pollution inherent in Forge Worlds, it was practically impossible to determine whether a genuine storm was forming or if it was simply the sound of war in the distance. The most definitive proof of an answer was the distinct roar of gunship engines surging not too far from their location. To even an Astartes, the view would be an obscured mystery, but the Lion calmly tracked the squadrons of Nephilim and Dark Talons, chasing after a few scattered alien craft. He, along with his inner circle companions and Azrael, stood at the ready on the overhead grated walkways, while Samael and a Ravenwing squad kept their motorized mounts among the already prepared cargo crates. Finally, L. JONSON spared a heartbeat to glance at the Astreus tank hidden under the walkway towers opposite of their location. No doubt of whether his sons would perform their best existed in his mind, but he could not deny that what he had orchestrated was a risky gambit. A fact reminded to him when Druscian came to his side and spoke.
So far, expectations are being exceeded, Lord Sion. Our simulations divined a successful prognosis of only 13%, yet our remaining cohorts report an enemy presence at the spaceport that exceeds the original estimates by 80%.
Do not raise your hopes of not doing battle just yet, Archmagos,
the Supreme Grandmaster scolded before addressing the Primarch.
Our scouts have reported that an enemy strike force has arrived at the abandoned yards. They have initiated sabotage per your instruction in order to tie them down for as long as possible.
Proof that the creature we are facing can cover the bare minimum of my expectations. Jaguar plans in the void.
Azrael's face muscles twitched from nearly contorting into a grimace, a detail perceived only by his gene-sire as he replied,
Predictably, Battle Group Seraph's Covenant is attempting to breach the looming enemy formation and ensure a free cordon is opened, at which point Thunderhawk extraction will be launched. It may take an initial hour. Despite discounting the chance for it, Emperor willing, we may accomplish the extraction.
Such a prognosis's probability is rising along with our prize,
Druscian added, his gaze indicating towards the current crate being pulled up into the air, whose markings of importance indicated that it bore the artifact. Instantly, disdain surged up to the Lion's mind. Despite having grown more understanding in these past 10,000 years, it still irritated him when mortals tempted fate so casually. As if to specifically prove the point, multiple ordnance strikes rained down on their position, demolishing a large portion of the Mechanicus emplacements and damaging the crane, leaving the cargo in its grasp dangling between the walkways. Flares of green light began bursting on the opposite end of the bay, summoning scores of the abominable aliens and their machines, who then advanced.
Deathwing deploy! Magus! Now!
The lion barked as he thundered down the grated paths towards the artifact, followed by his inner circle. Precisely at the Primarch's word, Drushian activated their trap, a secondary mortality field generator which began enveloping the cargo bay's entire perimeter, trapping, from the brief time given for estimation, several squads of enemies, along with 2 of their giant spider-like walkers. Outside of the field, more troops and 2 of their strange sail ship vehicles were unleashing hell in an attempt to break it open, but were thankfully unable to do so. The minute delay in the First Son's command ensured that there would be enough time for the squad of First Company veterans to teleport down to the pre-placed Homer. To everyone's shock, while the Terminators were able to begin manifesting before the field closed, instead of the burst of air displacement typical for successful teleportation, all 10 of the Deathwing appeared frozen in the air, their images flickering in and out of existence, being surrounded by a dozen more previously hidden xenos.
Astra's crew, concentrate fire on the column before you and get to the Deathwing!
"We cannot, my lord!" the sergeant shouted back through a severely deteriorating Vox. "A swarm of beetle machines is burrowing through the vehicle and has rendered it unresponsive. We're fighting them back and trying to repair it back to function, but their numbers keep rising." True to his words, a shimmering silver carpet of insectoid constructs started to leak from around the tank's position, supported by infantry. Gritting his teeth, L. Johnson issued new orders.
Raven Wing, break through to the Astrios and help to dislodge its occupation. We need its firepower!
By the time Samuel provided a single word confirmation, their bikes were already storming to the opposite end of the bay. Expectations most certainly met. All that was left now was to see how much of the hook his opponent had gobbled up. With the field raised, those within it were completely cut off from outside communication, necessitating his pre-planned orders for when the trap was sprung. However, even if his arch-opponent expected a second field generator to be present, he would still need to be on the same battlefield, personally or by proxy, to direct the fighting. It was now a matter of drawing him out into view. All of this and more streamed itself through the Primarch's mind as he and his forces neared the artifact. Suddenly, a mass of base infantry translated atop the battlements as well, and opened fire with their eldritch weaponry, right before the Knights of Caliban smashed into their ranks, and fury ensued. That should not have been possible, L. Johnson thought, cleaving through the 5 automatons that disintegrated one of his companions. None of their support systems should have been able to reach through the mortality field, yet somehow this mass of infantry had moved through the ether and were still rising up. After another of his sons was cut down from behind by enemies believed to be disposed of, he saw it. The thing leading them almost floated among the melee, the strange cloak it was draped with shimmering with light, allowing it to phase through bodies and attacks. And in one hand, it clutched a bizarre orb, whose malign radiance revealed itself as the catalyst for the resurrecting warriors. Most importantly, however, it was not him. Were they mistaken in identifying the Xenos' overall commander? Or was he so confident in his underlings to not fail without his guidance? The latter would be an error that Caliban's son would not leave unpunished, he resolved, upon cutting down the score of enemies that had engaged him, and raised his Arma Luminis, the ancient combi weapon targeting the whizzing alien leader. Just as he was about to pull its trigger, the metal frame they stood upon shook with the approach of one of the spider walkers, whose weapons locked onto them but did not fire. The answer as to why revealed itself a heartbeat later.
Halt!
Across the chasm from which the crates were being pulled up stood the cursed alien, surrounded by what appeared to be his elite guards, the champion among which towered by his side.
Under the authority of His Luminous Majesty, Imhotep the Stormlord, I, his NEMESOR, ZAHNDREKH, command thee to...
He was interrupted by the Arma Luminis' discharge. Reacting surprisingly quickly, one of the Lich Guard leapt in front of its master, blocking the shot at the cost of its own incineration. Based on the Xenos commander's following tone, this had clearly angered him. Without missing a beat, the Primarch leapt upon them, battering aside a pair of Lich Guard off of the platform, and struck forth with his sword. Its momentum was parried inches away from the Lordling's metal flesh by Oberon's scythe. Elite matched elite, as the Inner Circle companions linked up with their sire, having left a large portion of the regular warriors far too demolished to be restored in short order. L. Johnson pivoted his stance and attempted to swat the Varguard to the side with the Emperor's shield. Annoyingly, the machine was able to block it with the haft of his weapon, grinding barely a millimeter into the metal of the walkway, which he leveraged to swing up his own blade in an attempt to vertically bisect the Green Knight. The strike was met with an equal failure, as the lion's sword stopped its ascent. He then used the clash to slide the blade to one side in a feint, but then snake it in the opposite direction, seeking to undermine the Guardian's defense with speed rather than brawn. A silent whirl could be detected emanating from Oberon, engrams almost aflame from his exertion as he reduced his time sense, and the servos of his body accelerated his movement to match and overcome that of the human, along with the support of several Lich Guard. Haze began building up in the Vargard's synthetic consciousness. Their clashes became so vicious and blindingly fast that none of the Astartes present could follow them, even if they were not in the middle of battle and could observe it without interference. And with this ever-increasing exertion, memories of triumphs, of terrible losses, of difficult decisions, and calm days were burned to sustain it. The only constant Oberon could cling to was the duty to protect his master, focusing to preserve it above all else during the prolonged bout. In between that whirlwind, ZAHNDREKH shouted once again,
I am offering you salvation. If you have any shred of honor left in you, surrender. Return what you have wrongfully stolen, and you may find some mercy when brought to court for your transgressions.
A very poor attempt at an insult was the only thing the plea brought to the Primarch's mind as he disengaged and activated his helmet's Voxlink.
Drushian, now!
This time, without delay, the Archmagos deactivated the generator, then made way to extract himself from the premises. Multiple beams and ordnance from the advancing Necron column flew by after the fields bursting, leaving the Star of Gidrim exceedingly confused.
Have you decided to see reason, or have you gone mad? Surely you realize that you cannot defeat my forces now.
Maybe not with you leading them,
was the singular cold response that the sire of the First Legion would give before commanding the Inner Circle companions to also disengage and follow him in reclaiming the artifact. As if to underline his words, two Nephilim jet fighters thundered down from the sky, bathing the platform where the melee took place in death. The first gunship's line of fire tore through the Lich Guard, while that of the second would find its mark in the NEMESOR himself. Several bolts struck his body, their explosions throwing him off of the platform and plummeting towards the ground. One of the Nephilims was shot down by an outside Doomsday Arc, while the second evaded and turned, aiming to finish off the falling lordling before he even struck the Rockcrete.
ZAHNDREKH!
Immediately upon noticing this, with his delayed time sense, Oberon was able to issue a silent mental command for the Triarch Stalker to open fire on the humans, and activated his cloak, manifesting next to and protectively wrapping his arms around his friend, who, in the next couple of pulses of their atomic hearts, was forced to watch his Vargard be shredded by the bolter fire he was protecting his master from, including his cranium being ripped asunder until they finally crashed, creating a small crater. However, the developing situation was no kinder to the Primarch. Over half of his Inner Circle companions were destroyed by the Walker's weapons, leaving him, Azrael, and a few others surrounded by the remaining and encroaching squads of warriors. Belial's personal squad of the Deathwing had teleported down as well and searched to liberate their brothers trapped in stasis, but on the opposite flank, Samael had been the only one of the Ravenwing to reach the Astreus and help the crew fend off the aliens, while the second Nephilim was also shot down. At the same time, as he and his Supreme Grandmaster were carving a swath through the corpse-like machines, the Overlord who was keeping them reanimated was able to swoop in, tear into the dangling cargo crate, and seize the artifact. A stray bolt of lightning flashed through the sky, like the herald of the torrential downpour that followed it.
No, please! Stay with me, Oberon!
ZAHNDREKH practically sobbed out, water running down his face like tears, as he held the ravaged and unmoving form of his friend, whose necrodermis was struggling to repair itself. In his grief, he lifted him up in a tight embrace, hoping to somehow restore him, but nothing of the sort happened. His fixation was only stolen by the sound of battle, causing his eyes to glow with baleful rage as he locked onto the thief. Rage boiled within him like never before in his life, erupting as a simple yet all-consuming command.
Kill him!
From around the battlefield, every Necron and construct surged towards the crane platform. This sudden change of focus finally allowed the Astreus' crew the necessary reprieve to bring the machine back to life, which they used to demolish the Spider Walkers. The only exception to the undying mobilization was the fleeing Overlord. He knew ZAHNDREKH was mad, but he never expected him to make such a ridiculous order. But, after a couple of moments of processing, he realized what had likely happened. The necrodermis of his face nearly cracked from the synthesized feeling of joy as he used his shroud to transport himself closer to the NEMESOR's position. And sure enough, the Varguard was dead. All that was left was to finish the set.
"Oh, the Stormlord has truly blessed us,"
he exclaimed, catching the grieving general's attention.
What are you doing here? I gave an order!
"Your time of giving orders is over, madman,"
the Overlord retorted, raising his blade as he loomed over his prey.
You dare commit treason against Imhotep?
"Please, we both know the Stormlord would rather be rid of you. We would have done so much earlier were it not for that pile of scrap you keep clinging to."
What's your move?
"Or what? Face it, madman, you're no more alive than any of us. But you're going to become far more dead. I'll help you rejoin your precious commoner. Goodbye, ZAHNDREKH. Happy feasting in the beyond."
Just as he was about to deliver the killing blow, the twin macro-accelerator cannon of the now living tank, which was focused on the Triarch Stalker that loomed across from the dramatic scene, tore through the structure obscuring its line of fire, unexpectedly obliterating the Overlord, together with the giant walker in the distance, turning him into a metallic smear, while the artifact fell to the ground. Only after that did the NEMESOR feel his connection to the ships in orbit be restored. Even if he was saved, he resigned not to flee until his brother's killer was brought to justice. Upon the platform, the sheer weight of bodies being thrown against the Astartes was making movement difficult. By now, they had begun phasing out when slain, but more and more piled on the walkways from the precise killing strikes to the devices that ensured their recovery. To the immense displeasure of the Xenos leader, the humans were winning. The Lion's gambit that they could overcome the automatons, at least in such a disorganized fashion, was proving to be correct. What he did not account for, however, was the toll so much killing would begin to take. Not on himself, but on others. Surrounded, Azrael had become too preoccupied with dueling a Lich Guard to notice a lone lesser warrior raise and lift its axe bayonet for a decapitating strike. Storming through the mass of metal, JONSON was able to push his son out of the falling blade's way and disposed of the lesser alien, who dealt him the one and only wound he had suffered through the entire war. A single, thin cut on his cheek. However, with this lure taken, he finally found himself in the wrong place, as in the very next moment, a Doomsday Ark's main cannon struck him in the back. All of his surviving sons were crippled by shock in these final heartbeats, after which their Primarch was no more. New rage, fury, and hate were born then, sending every Astartes on the battlefield into a bloody yet bloodless frenzy. Brightest of all, however, was that of their supreme Grand Master. In the instant he regained his faculties, his bloodlusted vision focused on the still dissatisfied NEMESOR. While his brothers dismembered everything before them, with a mighty roar of vengeance, he launched himself at the Lordling. Unfortunately, due to the distance between them, before the angel could reach his prey, it picked up the Amunis's artifact and vanished in a flash of light, together with the remains of its Varguard. Aboard his capital ship, the surviving lords had gathered. With Oberon gone, now was the moment for them to finally dispose of the mad general. Instead of a grief-stricken mess, however, their ambush was met by a phalanx of Lich Guard, who forced them into imprisonment for the time being. With the bridge cleared, ZAHNDREKH issued his final decree for this campaign.
Recover any and all possible troops and assets from the surface, then send it to oblivion, for I refuse to behold its hideousness ever again, and depart to Mandragora post-haste.
Several of the larger ships in his fleet broke off from the main Void engagement, which had become similarly frantic after the human fleet had learned what had happened on the world below. Before any meaningful reaction could occur, however, multiple Oblivion bolts were released from their extra-dimensional holds and struck the planet, shattering and tearing its continental plates apart, then spearing through its flesh and through its core. Heartbeats after launching death, the Necron fleet surged out of the system, leaving the humans to the mercy of the stellar body's explosive doom, and whatever remained of their ships after it, with the horror of what they had lost. By the time their drives flung them through the void at impossible speeds, Oberon's form had recovered enough to once again stand by his master, but it was nothing more than an empty shell, devoid not only of memories, but all that the being it once was had been, looming and shambling like a puppet that somehow knew to only follow its NEMESOR. Unnerved by it, and even more so by the unusually grim, seething quiet of their general, one of the cryptechs inquired,
My lord, what are we to do now?
He glared back at the cryptech for a few moments, tightening his grip on the object he clutched, before returning his gaze to the void.
Send a message to the Crown World for the Diviner to be prepared to use his knowledge and skills. He will receive his Vishani's precious artifact after he restores Oberon. If he fails to do so, I will personally turn him into a god, broken and dead.